Okay, hello everyone and welcome today to what is going to be another episode of SpraynPray1000's The Verdict. I'm SpraynPray1000 and today we're going to talk about a game that, at least for me, should have really been a really, knock right out the ballpark and ends up being a very uneventful, unmemorable sort of game. We're going to talk about Mass Effect Andromeda today, and I'm not really even going to do the typical thing I do with most video games where I usually kind of preface it, maybe. I'm just going to kind of lead this review in a completely different direction. I'm going to start out and just basically give you up front what I think about this game, okay? And then you can hear my explanation after, but let's just save some time, right? This game is the pinnacle of mediocrity. This game is nothing really original, nothing really that made the original franchise good. I see a lot of potential, but a complete lack of any sort of real measurement that the game can live up to the predecessor, or at least give the impression that they tried. I feel like this game is a half-assed, really kind of sloppily done sort of game, with where your choices don't matter, where the gameplay is good but repetitive, and where the dialogue and story is fundamentally uninteresting and boring. So now that that's out the way, I just want to say that this game, in terms of the story, tries to differentiate itself. Right off the bat, they drop any pretense of the story events of Mass Effect 2 and 3 for the most part. They say that you and a bunch of other people of various races have all decided to board arcs, basically, and move to the Andromeda galaxy. And it has been a 600-year voyage. You've just arrived, and all the worlds that were promised to be golden worlds where people and all the different races would set up and start a new galactic civilization, a new sort of everything. That all kind of is there at the start. It's not a bad pretense, but it's one that's not really ever, it doesn't really live up to anything. It's never really fulfilled in the span of the game. And unfortunately, at its best, Andromeda is a repetitive, grindy, third-person shooter. And at its worst, it's just downright, not unplayable, but just downright boring, downright, almost I'd say insulting at points to the original series, and just flat out unappealing, if not a little bit cringeworthy. The dialogue in this game, drawing from Mass Effect sort of, your dialogue has choices or whatnot. The dialogue in this game, for the most part, quite literally has no consequence. There's nothing really to be lost or gained from the dialogue in this game. Whether you talk down to someone, whether you shit-talk them and tell them how much of a piece of shit they are, or whether you agree with them, rather than do the whole Paragon neutral renegade option that they had in the other couple of games, Mass Effect Andromeda decides to do away with that for the most part by implementing a system where you can talk between one of four options usually. You can either talk logically or on a very personal level, or you can give a very heartfelt or a professional answer. And wherever you can do one, you can always do its counterpart. Those aren't even the real names of what each dialogue choice is called, and I don't remember them because it's not really worth committing to memory, because either way your choices have no impact. It's almost as though whether or not you shit talk someone or not, that's not really the big issue here. It doesn't really seem to impact anything. Your choices, for the most part, don't really seem to impact too much. And the general very important dialogue choices you need to make are either, left or right. They're still binary. So getting rid of Paragon and Renegade didn't really benefit almost anything in regards. The story and characters themselves seem very uninterested. When you talk to a random character, they basically sit there tapping away at whatever they're doing, or they look off to the right, or they're doing other things. They seem very uninterested to talk with you. Not just because of lore, but just because it seems like they weren't programmed to even acknowledge your presence. It seems like you talking with them is more like you're anchored there while they do their own little repetitive action a few times over, as opposed to any real meaningful exchange of dialogue. In Mass Effect 1 through 3, almost every single dialogue with someone was basically accompanied by very memorable sorts of things, where you'll talk to someone, they'll talk about something heartfelt, they'll walk over to a window, maybe look out to try and mask their sorrow, they'll come back to you, okay Shepard, let's talk, You know, every person, you know, they have camera angles that show characters, you have close-ups on people, panoramic views, all this sort of great stuff, when in reality, Andromeda just basically says, oh, your character, the camera zooms in over your shoulder, you look at them, your teammates who you can't even rotate to the camera to see are off in the background, speaking very quietly, or not at all sometimes. This game has a problem with audio playing at all sometimes, where it's very delayed when it does, whether it's in conversation or not. Just really kind of sloppy, in my opinion. It just doesn't really convey the sense of an epic space narrative, or even just interesting dialogue with characters who you're supposed to connect with, you're supposed to feel some sort of care and attraction to over the course of the game. I just really feel they completely dropped the hammer on that. The gameplay of Mass Effect Andromeda, like I said, is at best repetitive and at worst just downright unfun and boring. You basically drive around this big open world. There's multiple planets you can land on. You basically land on one. You drive around in your car, the Nomad. There's no vehicular combat. The Nomad is basically slightly faster than Mass Effect 1's Mako, but without half the interesting quest lines, you know, to sort of bridge the long driving, and much slower than the hovercraft that Mass Effect 2 2 was really working on when the DLC. So basically they learned nothing from their previous exploits. The Mako, since there's no combat, basically the only combat in the game is third-person over-the-shoulder style shooting. Again, that's fun and all, it's great. I don't mind it too much. I would say that the game has a minor ammo problem, but that would kind of be, you know, putting it on the same level as some of the other problems. Flat out, while the game has verticality to it in the sense that there's now multiple levels to combat, you can jump around, climb up to higher areas, fall down, and all that sort of stuff, and you can generally pick the terms of your engagement. And I do like the fact that the game is very fast-paced and fun because of that fast-paced nature, sort of in the same way that Doom is. This game lacks a lot of fundamentals. This game feels to me like there's a lot of cool stuff that could have been done here, and ultimately it just ends up falling on its face because they don't really evolve it beyond that. Sure, there's biotic combos and all this other stuff, but why even bother when on the default difficulty setting the AI is fundamentally stupid at times, doesn't bother flanking, doesn't even really mind it half the time if you get up in its face and just pull the trigger until it dies. And now that could just be that the player is overpowered, but there's an immense sense that the normal difficulty is very lacking in a lot of degrees. There's not a lot of punishment. Very rarely was it that I was actually in a situation where I felt like, well, I might actually die here. And of course, I would up the ante to higher difficulties, but I feel that since the AI is kind of lackluster and piss poor, I don't think that AI difficulty and planning should be tied to the difficulty of the game. I feel like all that it's going to do is just put up all the different AI, so that way they basically 1 or 2 shot your shields and then 1 or 2 shot you thereafter. And having played other Mass Effect games on Insanity, that's not exactly the sort of thing I'm looking forward to, especially in the confining aspects of some of the gear and equipment and upgrade and researching and developing that you can do in Andromeda. But the combat itself is not bad. If the combat was the sole part of this review, I'd probably give it a higher score, like a mid-70s or something. But because the story is essentially, in my opinion, a 2.5 out of 10 at best, I really can't give it much. I really don't care about any of the characters. I didn't really care about any of the dialogue or the gameplay. I just felt like, the dialogue or the conversations or the characters. I just felt like the dialogue was this barrier that more or less prevented me from continuing with the gameplay I so loved, I guess, for lack of a better term, if you really want to loosely apply love here. Graphically and soundtrack-wise, the game is basically a wallflower. I don't think that anyone's going to really come back later in life and really say that Mass Effect Andromeda blew their socks off in terms of dialogue and gameplay. But, yeah, I mean, there's not really much to say here because there's not really much to say about the game. It's average at best and boring at worst. So, what would I give a game like this? A flat 65. Sorry. I mean, I can't give it anything higher. I've thought about it, but I mean, I just, like, this is a game that's 90% of it is about the dialogue and the story and building up. And then the rest of it is about, you know, shooting and generic type of stuff. And while they do harken back to the glory days of Mass Effect 1, I feel like they're fundamentally missing a lot from the game. they're missing out on a lot of stuff that made Mass Effect 1 such a good game, which is, you know, the fact that you're attached to these characters, you know, the fact that you care, the fact that everyone feels like they have a unique story worth hearing. And half the time in Andromeda, I'm just sitting here like, please shut up, please shut up, please shut up, please shut up. So yeah, that's basically it for Andromeda. 65, I'm done. I don't really have much to say about this verdict. There's not really that, and the multiplayer is pretty good, but it's not as redeemable. It's basically copy-paste 3 for the most part with some changes, but the main meat of this game is boring. It's repetitive, it's not interesting, and I couldn't advise getting it over a rent because it's just very straightforward, to the point, and not very well elaborated. They don't really explore a lot of things. Your choices don't impact anything, which would be fine if the story and characters were good, but I feel that they aren't. So that's it for Andromeda. Glad to put it behind me, and I'll see you guys for the next one.